mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our online software training with Stan Hewlett. And actually, I just realized my screen says part 2, but today we are in fact doing part 3. So hopefully those of you, if you weren't able to participate in parts 1 or part 2, we ran those over the summer and early fall. Those recordings are up on our website, so you can still take advantage of that content. So without further ado, I'm going to change the screen here to Stan. And while I'm doing that, I just want to make sure everybody knows that if you do have questions throughout the session today, we obviously want to make sure you get those asked and answered. So you can simply type those into the questions box, and I'll take care of getting those questions over to Stan. If it makes sense to ask him in the middle of what he's doing, you know, we'll jump in and get them answered then. Otherwise, obviously, we'll have some good Q&A at the end as well. So with that, we'll just let Stan take it off and dive right in.
Thanks, Mo. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, in this session of part 3, I'm basically going to be talking about these tabs that we actually have over here on the top, you know, talking about the record information, images, and so on. To begin with, I'm just going to do a quick review of what we actually went over last time. The last session on part 2, we talked about how to create our first route from our walkthrough that we actually did from part 1. I talked about the communication tab, you know, how to configure your ultraprobes to DMS, how to test your connection, how to send and retrieve your group from your probe, and so on. And then, excuse me, and then after that, we basically uploaded and downloaded our first route into our DMS. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over all these different options that we actually have here, all these different tabs. So if I open up one of my groups here, if I go into my bearings underneath this one plant called Toyota, and I open up this one group called the engine, we actually have a list of all of our machines and locations, which I talked about there last time. And then we actually have all of our different points that we actually have for underneath all these machines and location names. So if we go even further, the last session that we actually had, we had just one historical record or baseline reading. So all of our future readings will be compared to that baseline reading that we took in the past. So here's a look at what it could actually look like over time. And you can tell which one is your baseline reading because the baseline reading will be in bold lettering, okay? So if we just highlight our baseline reading, for instance, and we look over to our right into our record information, you'll see all the information that the ultraprobe has collected and placed inside this one historical record. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the date and time, basically when we actually download the information from our ultraprobe into DMS. It creates a date and a time of when we actually did that. Then underneath that, we actually have our dB values that we actually took for this one particular point in time. And then over here to the right is our frequency. So when we're doing bearings, our starting point will be at 30 kilohertz. So over time, if you start looking at our line chart, which I'm going to go over a little bit later on, if you see a discrepancy, most people will actually look at the frequency first because when you change the frequency, you're affecting the dB values. So if we start off with 30 kilohertz and we ended up with 17 dBs, for instance, and Joe Schmo went out there and recorded the same point at 40 kilohertz, his dB value will be different, and we can actually see that in our chart, our line chart, and we can see the discrepancy. We can actually look back into this record information and see where the discrepancy is, okay? The other parts of the record information is the mode. You can actually choose real-time, snapshot, peak hold. We have our sensitivity value, which you're going to be constantly changing with your ultraprobe. Your offset value, if you have more than one ultraprobe, if they're off by a couple dBs, you can actually offset them by whatever difference that you actually have. It could be 3 dBs, 2 dBs, and so on. Your alarm. This is something I'm going to go over a little bit later on today also. You can actually establish alarm levels for each individual test point so that if you do hit one of these alarm states, they will actually pop up as a yellow flag or a red flag. and then you can actually see that in your line chart also. And then basically you got your location name, your point name, you got your comment box. Your comment box could be anything you want to type in there. It's basically unlimited of how many characters that you can actually place in there. But you want to try to keep it short and sweet. So if we're doing a bearing test and we actually, let's say we change the bearing somewhere, we can actually say that we can type in this is a new bearing, so that when we actually look back here, in the future we can say, okay, we changed the bearing on this such and such date. Okay. The WAV file, basically any sound files that you actually record with the UltraProbe, either the UltraProbe 10,000 or 15,000, those are the only two instruments that has the ability to record the sound wave. You'll be able to see where it's actually going to be placed within your DMS plant folder. And if you actually have a sound file that's not attached to it, to a historical record, you can actually browse to the area that you want to attach a sound file to. So if you know exactly where it is, I can show you exactly how to do that. So we just go into our DMS plant folder, and you basically find the folder that actually has the sound file that you want to attach to, and just double click on the sound file and you can see that where it's actually located. And once that is in place, you can actually hit the open button to launch your spectralizer software so that you can actually analyze that sound further, so that you can have a better understanding of what you're actually listening to. So the record path here is basically where the point is actually being stored. This is the record path, basically in our DMS plant folder. The module type over here, this is the other area that you can actually concentrate on if there's some sort of discrepancy that you see in your line chart. Besides looking at the frequency, if you're constantly using the STM and somebody goes out there and records something and gets a totally different dB value, and you look back and he's actually using, let's say, a RAS-MT or a magnet mount, you can see that they weren't using the correct module for that. Everything's about consistency with this, especially when it comes to bearings. So you want to be as consistent as possible, being consistent with your frequency, and obviously being consistent with your module type that you're actually using for your testing. Okay? So if you start off with something, you always want to use that same part over and over again. The inspector ID, you have the ability on the UltraProbe 10,000 and 15,000, you can actually create IDs for individuals that are actually going out there to record or collect data with those UltraProbes. So if you do see a discrepancy, you can actually look at the ID number. And in this case, and this is my ID that I actually created for myself. So if you're actually going out there and looking at the data and you see a discrepancy, you can actually highlight that historical record, and you can see that I actually went out there and collected that data. So if you have questions, you know exactly who to go to ask certain questions about why did I get this weird reading. The meter response is basically how fast you want your display to be read off from the UltraProbe itself, either the 10 or the 15. The most common that everybody uses is medium. Slow is basically a little bit too slow for some people. For me, for instance, I like using fast. It's really a user setting that it's up to you which way you want to go with that. The units, basically, you can actually use. You got the different types of scales that you can actually choose from, either being relative or offset, depending on if you have multiple UltraProbes. And then you can actually type in what type of instrument that you were actually using to collect this data. So if you have multiple UltraProbes, let's say a 9, a 10, and a 15, you can actually type in exactly which instrument you are actually using for this collection. And then you can go even further than that by typing in the serial number. So if you have multiple UltraProbe 15,000, you can actually type in the serial number so that you know exactly which 15,000 that you were actually using. And then down below, this area that's actually grayed out that says baseline, it has a check mark. Basically, if you see this check mark next to the baseline, it's basically telling us that we're actually looking at the baseline reading. So if we check some other historical record, we can see that it's not checked and it's telling us that this is not the baseline. But this is very important because when you guys are actually going out there and changing stuff, old parts with new parts, for bearings, for instance, if we go in here and look at this and say we've changed this bearing, this is a brand new bearing, we want to go out there and collect that reading, and then once we actually download the information into DMS, we can highlight that historical record and hit this check mark. And you can actually see that my baseline reading went from 9/9/2003 to 8/9/2009. Okay, so everything from this point on will be, all future readings will be compared to this new baseline reading that we actually just created. Now, this other area right over here, the test results and temperature, this is very specific for the application that you're actually in. This will actually be will change depending on which application level that you're actually in. So if we're in bearings, for instance, we have for test results all these different options that we can actually use. So if we went ahead and recorded a dB value and we actually lubricated that, we can actually go into our 10,000 to 15,000 and change the value from NE, which is no entry, to, let's say, LOB, which is lube. Or if you actually repaired something, that's REP. If it's a VIB, it means it's a vibration issue. Or if you think that you've got some sort of fluting action or whatever, you can actually put down ELE, which is an electrical problem. So you guys can really dig into it and really put a lot of information in here. For this bearing application level, we actually have a temperature reading that we can actually plug into here. On the 15,000, you actually have a temperature probe so that you can actually record a temperature reading of that bearing and actually being stored in here. Info is actually something that we're actually going to be planning on using in the future, so right now you don't have to worry about that. Same thing with the type. Also for the bearing application, we actually have a RPM, so we can actually record the RPM speed. So if you have a tachometer with you, you can actually record that and place it in here in the DMS. And now with the new 15,000 that we're actually getting ready to implement on the new instruments, we actually put a tachometer or a strobe light feature on the 15,000, so you can actually record how fast a certain part is actually spinning. So you have the option of going as low as 1 RPM and going up as high as 4,000 RPMs. So you'll actually have that ability to record the RPM speed with the 15,000. And then the bearing info, whatever that you want to plug in there, saying, if it's a sealed bearing or some other type of bearing information that you want to place in there, you can actually place it into that area. If I go into a different application level, if I go into my electrical, I can show you the difference between the two. The test results, you only have these options here. So since we're in an electrical application level, we have the choices of saying that we have a corona effect, some kind of tracking issue, arcing issue, partial discharge, or you got some sort of mechanical issue with that part that you're actually testing. We have a temperature box in here that you can actually record a temperature reading of. Location, that's something that we're planning on implementing in the future. The different type of components that you're actually testing, it could be a switchgear, transformer, and so on. And then the different type of voltages that you can actually choose for DMS. And then for electricity, it's very important to know what the humidity is. So depending on what application level you're in, it'll actually change. So if we go into our leaks, you can see that it's different. So we can say that it's leaking, it's okay, there's no leak. You checked it out, what the pressure is at the leak, if you find one, the application, if it's compressed air, nitrogen, argon, hydrogen, helium, so on. So you can actually add features in here, certain type of gases, and then basically the distance of what you actually record the leak at. So depending on where you are within the application level, this area over here will change. Oops, let me go back here. So the next tab that I'm going to go over is the image tab. Okay, the image tab basically is where we can actually store all images and basically attach them to historical records, to our test points, to our location levels. So in this case right here, I don't have an image here. So if you have a digital camera and you don't have a 15,000 where you can actually record, take a snapshot of a part, you can actually bring a digital camera and store it onto your computer, and all you have to do is basically link that image to that historical record. So in order to do that, we actually highlight the historical record that we want to attach an image to, and basically what you can do is actually go here and hit the Add button. We actually have all these, you have to know exactly where the image is actually placing, and I'm going to make this very simple. I'm just going to go over here to my pictures and go to my sample pictures, and basically once you find the image that you want, you just double click it and it attaches the link. Okay? Now if you don't like this image, all you have to do is just basically highlight the image that you don't want, and since we only got one, it doesn't make any difference. We can actually hit the remove button and we can actually remove the link. It does not delete the photograph, it just removes the link to that photo where it's actually being stored. Okay? So if we go back and add an image again, let me move this out of the way. We can actually have this, we have this attach to button. If we hit that, we have these different options to attach the image to. We can attach it to the baseline. So if you guys are 15,000 users, any images and any sound files that are attached to that baseline will be uploaded to the 15,000 so that you can actually hear the sound or actually look at any type of images that are associated with that baseline. So all baseline readings, if there's an image or a sound file attached to that baseline, it will be uploaded to your 15,000 so that you can actually analyze on your 15. So the point, you can actually attach it to the point level if you want. So if I actually click on point, you can see that my point tail, if I highlight this, you can actually see that I have that image attached to that point. And if I want to attach it to the group level, you can see at my engine group level, the image is there also. Again, if you want to add it, you can just hit the add button, find out where the image is, just double click on the image, and it'll attach itself to that point, record, group, whatever. And if you don't want it, you just hit the remove, and it will just remove that link. Now the other option that you have is this little browse button. This pass is basically telling you where that link is. If we hit the browse button here, it'll take us right there. So if there's other images in here that we want to attach to, we just double click on it and it'll be linked to that record or point and so on. So I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to ask Maureen to see if there's any questions out there for right now. If not, then I'll just continue on.
Yeah, we did have one question. So when you were showing about changing some of those various values, the question is wondering if that would actually change the information on whatever piece of equipment they're using or not.
Can you say that again? You broke up there, Mom.
Oh, sorry. I think we're having some audio problems a little bit today. So the question was, when you were talking about changing the frequency or any of the baseline reading information, if changing those parameters in the software, how does that affect the actual instrument or ultraprobe that someone's using?
Well, if you change, well, okay, I think I understand. If you actually change the frequency, if we actually found somebody, like in this case right here, our baseline reading was 30 kilohertz, and our next reading that we took, you can see that someone actually recorded that baseline, I mean that reading at 40 kilohertz. So effectively it did change the dB value. So if we look at our chart, line chart for instance, we can actually see the discrepancy, like a major jump, and then I will actually look back into my record information and look at that specific date, and then I would actually, the first thing I would actually look at would be the frequency, and then I would know that they actually recorded that wrong. Is that what you're trying to ask?
Well, that's how it was written. So if the person needs a little bit more clarification, then we'll ask them to write that in.
Okay. Any other questions?
Oh, okay. So here's, sorry, so they did just pop back in. So if you change it on the baseline in the software, does it change it on the gun?
Yes and no.
Okay.
There is a feature on the Ultra Probe 10,000 and 15,000 where you actually have manual mode and auto mode. If you set it on auto, when you actually upload the route to the guns, they'll actually look at what you actually have for frequency, sensitivity for that one specific baseline, and it'll change it to that what the baseline reading it was on DMS. Now, if it was on manual and you upload that information, and the guns were actually on default settings, usually it will automatically set it at 40 kilohertz. So if you're doing bearings, you're consistently changing the frequency all the time from point to point. So it's very important to, if you're doing bearings and you want to try to stay consistent, you want to make sure that once you actually establish your baseline readings, you have your gun set up on the auto mode. And it'll automatically change the frequency and the sensitivity values automatically for you from point to point so that you don't have to go through all those extra steps and waste extra time.
Okay. Well, if anybody else has questions, obviously pop them in there. But for now, Stan, I think you can move on to the next part.
Okay. All right. Our next tab is basically our history tab. And in order for us to actually see the information that in the history tab, we actually have to highlight our test point. Okay. This will actually affect our line chart. This is the information that will be transposed onto our line chart itself. So our default settings that we actually have, then the most common that everybody will actually see will be the dB value that we actually record, the low and high alarms that we're going to establish a little bit later on, and then our baseline dB values. And then over here on the far left is all the historical records that we actually took with this one particular point that we've been testing over time. So if there's extra stuff that you guys want to bring over to the line chart, let's say if we want to look at the RPM speed, all we have to do is just come over here to this box that has a list of different options that we can actually place into the line chart. If we want to, start trending the RPM speeds, all we have to do is just highlight the RPM down here, and you can actually see that this left arrow is highlighted, telling us that we can actually move that over to our history tab. And you can actually see that we have an RPM column, and here's all the information that we have collected over time. So if there's temperature readings that you want to take and you want to trend over time, you just highlight the temperature and just move it over. And you can see all the different temperature readings that we have taken over time also. So if there's stuff that yeah.
Sorry, Stan, didn't mean to interrupt, but since we got quite a lot of information on the screen there, a couple folks just wondering if you could maximize the screen a little bit better, make it a little easier to see.
Yeah. Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. So if there's stuff that you guys don't want, let's say we don't want the temperature or the RPM speed, we can actually just highlight the temperature reading here, for instance, and you'll see the columns actually all highlighted, and you'll actually see the arrow point to the right telling us that we have the ability to actually move this back to the box. And we can do the same thing for all this other stuff too if we wanted to. So right now I don't want the RPM speed, I just want to have my dB, low and high alarms, and my baseline readings showing on my line chart. So basically you just highlight the RPM speed, for instance, and just hit this arrow key, and it'll bring it back to this box. Now if it's something that you're ready, you're all done with all the different options that you can choose from here, you can actually export this to a notepad, so you can actually have this onto a document of notepad so that you can actually go back to it later on instead of just opening up DMS every single time. So all we have to do is hit export and then just type in whatever. So we can just say history if we wanted to, and just save as. If I just minimize this just a little bit, we can actually bring this up, and you can actually see this. It basically brings everything from the history tab and brings it over to this notepad document so that we can store it somewhere else if we wanted to. Okay?
Hey, Stan, someone just asked a question when they're looking at your alarms in the history example, wondering why the alarms are at different settings in that example.
That's something I'm going to actually go over very shortly.
Okay.
They're all based off of the baseline readings that we actually take. And plus I was monkeying around with it last night and today, so everything's all screwed up here.
Okay.
But everything's, so it would all be the same here momentarily.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, just wanted to get that. It seemed like a good break.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah, don't get freaked out over that, okay?
All right.
So our next tab is basically our line chart tab, okay? So if I actually click on that, we can actually see, this is a little bit too much to show right now. Let me bring it down a little bit. So this is our line chart, and I got it set up to look at the last 4 years, or basically 48 months. So I'm looking at the last 48 months of all of this history that I've been taking, okay? So we have our baseline reading, and it's basically our green line here. We have a yellow line and a red line. Basically, the yellow line is our low-level alarm, and our red line is our high-level alarm, okay? These alarms will be talked about here after I get done with the chart. So basically, when we're doing bearing trending, for instance, this line chart here that has the yellow line, basically anything that hits this basically is telling me that I have a lubrication problem. Usually that is caused by an 8 dB or higher reading from the baseline reading. And then our red line here, which is my high alarm reading, is basically 16 dBs from our baseline reading. So anything that actually goes above that red line basically is telling me I have physical damage or starting stages of physical damage of my bearing. So I can actually have a glimpse of what's actually happening to my bearing without tearing the bearing apart and actually looking with my own eyes. So it basically gives me an inside look at what it's actually behaving like when it's in operation. Okay, so this blue line here is basically our dB values that we've been taking or collecting over time, and basically have lines attached to these dB readings. So if you want to go back farther, you can actually go back here to your display months here and change it to whatever months that you want. We can go back as much as 10 years if we wanted to. Basically, you just change it to 120. You can see I got some funky stuff going on here. Don't worry about it. This will be all straightened out by the time we go into our alarms. And then if we want to apply this display month, if I go back to my last 40, let's say 46 months, we can actually apply this to my group, okay? So if I go to my next point, which is down here, to my motor 2 shaft side, if I highlight this, you can see that my display months is looking back the last 46 months, okay? We can also print this into a PDF file if we wanted to. Save it as a PDF and then print it from our printer if your computer is attached to it. So you can save this. You can also, if I hit the save, we have a place to actually store it if we wanted to, and just say chart, for instance, and save it. We have another box that pops up called attach image. So we have the option of not attaching this image, or we can actually attach it to the baseline. This is very important to the people that actually have a UP 15,000. If you attach this chart to your baseline reading, that will be uploaded from DMS to your gun. So if your gun is actually hitting an alarm level, okay, your dB values that you see on your display will change from black to red, basically telling you that you actually hit an alarm state. But for us, we don't know how bad it is. So if we actually attach this line chart to the baseline reading, we can get a rough estimate of what the bearing is actually doing. So we can take an educated guess, basically telling us if we're dealing with a lubrication problem or we got a much severe issue on our hands where we actually have a physical damage issue with a particular bearing. So we can attach it to the baseline if we wanted to, and I'm going to, so I can actually show you on the image of the baseline. Oops, that's down here, isn't it? There it is. So we can actually look at this. How come it's not popping up here? There we go. We can actually see this. So this is attached to my baseline. So effectively, if the next time I actually upload this information to my gun, we can actually see this on our UltraPro 15,000. So if I do hit an alarm state on this one particular bearing, I can actually look at this image and see what I'm actually dealing with. So if it's just a lubrication problem, if I have my grease gun with me, I can actually grease it right there on the spot.
Hey, Stan, real quick question. When you're from the history tab information, what are our options for actually plotting in this chart tab?
All the different options that we have. We
Yeah.
can actually bring over RPM speed if we wanted to. So if we bring over RPM speed, okay, and then go to our chart, you can actually see the RPM speed that we have. Now, granted, if you look down towards the bottom, we have a bunch of different colors right here, and that's just because we actually have our RPM speed here showing. So we're dealing with RPM speeds looks like greater than almost 2,000 RPM. We got another one at 1,700. So the other stuff, like looking at the dB value, we would not be able to look at that because we are actually looking at the RPM speed. Okay. Now, if we wanted to, the other options that we actually have, I think someone's actually sending me in. Okay, never mind. If we go back to our line chart, okay, if we don't like the colors, we can actually change the colors of the different lines, you know, dB values, the alarms and stuff like that. And all we have to do is just go into our dB value. If I want to change my line color for my dBs, I just go over to my dB box over here. That's blue. Right click, and we have all these different options to change. So I want to change my color to, let's say, this color right here. You can change it to whatever color that you want, and also you can actually change the way that the line actually looks. So if you want to change the line the way that it looks, we can actually go down where it says interpolation, and actually we have 6 different options to go by. So if I want to change it to this one, you can see that the lines are actually changed. Okay? So it's very, you know, you can change it to anything that you want to your own liking. If this looks better to you, you can use this if you wanted to. If there's other, you know, you can change it into a bar graph if you wanted to, vertical bars, horizontal bars. There's so many different options that you can go by to this chart. Okay? And someone's asking me, why pink? Well, that's the color I picked for right now.
So, but real quick, just to go back to the history. So when you go back, when you're in the history tab and you've got all those options there on the right, can you plot all of those, or just the ones that you've shown us so far?
You can plot basically. I mean, there's certain stuff that you can't plot. Let's say the comments. Actually, I haven't tried this one, so let me try this. So, yeah, that stuff won't come over.
Okay.
Okay. But the other stuff that are more common would be the temperatures, the RPM speeds. Those are the most common that everybody will use. The frequencies, you can actually use the frequencies so that you can catch it right off. You know, if someone's actually recording something differently at a different frequency, you can actually catch that in the line chart if you wanted to. So yeah, I mean, there's certain things in there that you can't use for the line charts, and there's other options that you can use for the line chart. Now the next tab is our alarm tab. This is where we actually set certain parameters for each bearing in this case. So basically all you have to do is just highlight your baseline reading. Okay, you can see which one is our baseline reading because this baseline will actually be in green. So if we highlight a different historical record, you can see that it's black. Okay, so we want to make sure that our baseline reading is highlighted because what we're going to do, we're going to set up our alarms. So what we're going to do, typically when we're dealing with bearings, is we always go by the 8 and 16 typically. Okay, 8 dBs above its original baseline reading will actually be a lubrication problem, and then anything above 16 will pop up as a red flag telling us that we got starting stages of physical damage of our bearing. Now, if you got special bearings and you don't want to use the 8 and 16, you can use a lower number or a higher number if you want. It's really up to you, but we always teach people to start off with 8 and 16. So all we have to do is just go into our low alarm deltas and just type in 8, or if you want to use the up arrows, down arrows, you can do it that way. So we can change our high alarm delta to 16. So basically what we're doing, we're adding these values to the baseline reading. And then once we have it set in stone, we just come over here to update all alarm levels using deltas. And basically when we do this, we're actually adding all these values to every one of our baseline readings that we have in our in this one particular group. So this is going to be group effective right here, this button right here, and this button up here. So if we come down here to our next baseline, our next point here, we have a dB value of 32. So if we look at up here on our high alarm and low alarm levels, we can actually see that anything that hits 40 or higher will pop up as a yellow flag, and then anything that actually hits 48 or higher will pop up as a red flag. Now, you can have specialty bearings in here that are really crucial to you guys, so you might not use the 8 and 16. So if we just come over here to this bearing right here that we have already highlighted in blue, we might want to just change it instead of being at 40 giving us a yellow alarm. We might just change this to, let's say, 34, and then change our high alarm to maybe 36. And then that's all we do. We don't hit any of these buttons over here, because if we hit this button, it's going to put all these values to all of these points that we have in our group. So if we have a special bearing that we really want to really watch closely, we can actually change the values here and just leave it be. So if we come back here to my first point, we can see that we did not attach that special value to this point, to this other bearing. It's just for this one particular bearing that we were watching closely. Okay? Does everybody understand that?
Hopefully they're all nodding their heads.
I just realized that. Okay, so I'm going to take a break right now. I'm going to ask Maureen to see if there's any other questions out there.
All right. Let's see. We do have one comment when you were talking about monkeying around. They just blamed that on you being a Giants fan. So
Okay.
We've got a good feisty group today. So seriously, someone was asking, what do I need to do to make that change of a single alarm to have it take effect?
Basically, I just did that. I just went over here and just changed the values up in this one area. I know this is actually different to the DMS that you guys actually have. This is going to be the newer look, but it still behaves the same way. So basically, again, if you guys got a lot of bearings in one particular route and you got one special bearing that you don't want to use the deltas for, you can just come up here and change the values here and just leave it be. And then at that point, once you're all done establishing your alarm levels, they'll be uploaded to your ultra probes so that you can collect data. And if anything that actually hits 25 or higher will pop up as a yellow flag. And then in this case, anything hits 33 will pop up as a red flag. But it's not actually it's 34 and 36, but it's not going to affect all the other bearings. So it's only affecting just that one bearing itself. Okay?
All right. And then someone was wondering, if you set a new or start a new baseline, can you delete any old sound files that were related to what you had set up before, or is that even what you would recommend for people?
I wouldn't recommend trying to delete anything. You just want to see how your bearings are actually behaving over time. I do actually have one customer that I know pretty well that's been collecting data for probably close to 8-9 years. They've collected so much data that they're at a point now that if they use the same bearing and use the same motors and stuff like that, they can actually look at their history and know when that bearing is actually going to be, when it's going to fail, when they actually do their lubrication correctly. So, for instance, if they change a bearing, they can actually create a scheduled downtime to replace that bearing 3 years from now because they have so much information to go by. So, for me personally, I wouldn't advise deleting anything beyond, behind the baseline reading. I know we've been talking about it off and on, but there might be an option in the future where you actually have the ability to, there's some people that have 10 years worth of data, and obviously it's going to be overwhelming to actually look at all that information. So there might be in a future version of DMS where you actually have the ability to only look back at maybe the last 12 months behind that baseline reading, and then everything that's behind that will be archived somewhere else in a different folder.
All right. Well, that's the questions for now. So I think we can.
Okay. The report tab. I'm sorry, Maureen.
Nope, we're good.
The report tab. I'm really not going to go digging into this area today because it will probably take another hour to go through. To go over all the different reports that we actually have, depending on what kind of application level that you're in. All I'm going to say for right now in this session is that DMS knows exactly which reports to bring up because it'll know exactly where you are within your hierarchy in your plant level. So right now, it knows that I'm actually in my bearing application, so it's going to bring up all these specific reports I can actually create for my bearings. So if I come over here to my electrical level, you can see that it changes to these 3 reports. And if I go further down, let's say if I go into my leak reports, it'll bring up all the different options for my leaks that I can actually create certain reports for this leak application level. So the bottom line is DMS will know exactly which reports to bring up because it'll know exactly where you are within your hierarchy, okay? And basically, if you highlight a certain report, you just come over here and hit the Generate Select Report, and you just basically create a name for it, and it'll create that report in an Excel spreadsheet, and so that you can actually look at it afterwards. It'll pull all that information out for that group and place it into an Excel spreadsheet so that you can actually take a closer look at what's, what is actually behaving good and what is actually behaving wrongly. The other options that we actually have is a custom report. So, if there's a report here that you don't like or doesn't give you enough information or too much information, you can actually come over here and create a custom report, and then you can actually follow the fields and what kind of stuff that you want to bring over, and then it'll bring all that information over to this new report. This button over here, to create a SQL report, if you know SQL, then you can actually go into this area right here and actually create a special report in SQL. And then if there's any custom reports that you have generated and you want to bring that up, and it's not going to be populated here, you can actually hit this button here where it says Load Custom Reports. If you hit this, it will actually bring up with this export wizard, and all we have to do is actually load a saved query, and you can actually see the special reports that I've created in the past. So I can actually pick a special report that I've created in the past and reuse that, and it'll populate that report for me so I can actually look at it. Again, the other reports I'm going to do next month. I'm going to go step by step what each report can do for you guys, how to actually create all these individual reports, but right now it would just take way too much time for today. And then lastly, we actually have a versions tab. Basically, how this works is you can actually periodically, DMS will actually ping itself to our website and actually check if there's a different version of DMS out there. So if you don't go into this version tab and actually hit the check for updates, there is a time limit where it will actually go out there and check it on its own. So you need internet access to do this, obviously. But if you do, periodically DMS will actually shoot out a signal to our website, and see if it actually matches up to the version that you actually have. If it doesn't, the current version will actually be populated over here, and then it'll show you what the available DMS or the new version will be called over here. You actually have a check for updates, so if you want to go out there and check it right now, you can actually hit this button. And you can tell, obviously I have a newer version that I've been testing and it doesn't match up to the version that we actually have on our website. So it's going to basically tell us, there's an upgrade notification box that will pop up. So if you want to download it, you can actually hit the yes button, and basically it'll take us to our website to actually download the new version. And then at that point, you can download it to your computer, unzip the file so that you can get to the installation program. And then before you actually install it, you obviously have to uninstall the old version before you put the new version on. So those are the options that you actually have. Right now, people that actually have 5.2.31 will have this ability to actually check for updates. People before this version, I think the version before this is actually 5.1. I don't think you actually have that option there. If you do, it wasn't even activated yet. So we were actually playing around with that idea back then. And that's about it, guys. Any questions?
All right, everybody. If anybody has questions, certainly send those over. And if anybody has some, it looks like we've got a couple of specific issues, so we'll circle with some of these folks offline, just so we can help some people with their updates and things like that. But Stan, I did want to take the screen back from you real quick because I thought it might be helpful just to make sure everybody can see where you can access the recordings of these training sessions you've been doing. Because as we did mention, what Stan just reviewed was part 3, and we obviously have done part 1 and a part 2, and so today's will be up on our website here soon. But basically, if you go to uesystems.com, which you can hopefully see on my screen here, and then you go to training, then go to our online learning center, which, by the way, has a ton of information with all of our recorded webinars and things like that. But what you want to do specifically to find these is to go to the tutorials page, and then you'll see that here we've got the part 1 and part 2 recordings right here on our tutorials page, as well as obviously you can see a ton of other short little videos to help you, with whatever piece of equipment that you might have of ours. So I just thought that might be helpful to show folks. So obviously you guys know how to reach us if you have questions after we get off of this session today. But I did want to just throw some dates up here for you all to see. As Dan was mentioning, he's going to really start digging into the different reports, and depending on which type of report, I could see, maybe 1 or 2 reports per session. I'm not sure. I guess, Stan, you're going to have to, you'll be figuring that out. But those obviously will take a little bit more time and explanation. But the next software training is going to be Tuesday, December 17th. So we'll obviously be getting an invitation out about that. And as Stan mentioned, he's gonna start getting in on those reports. Then just want to make sure you guys are keeping our conference dates on your radar. May 13th through 16th next year in Florida, we're going to have our 10th annual Ultrasound World, which will have a full day of a full post-conference workshop on software. So that's always pretty popular, and hopefully a good opportunity for you guys to really dig in on the different aspects of the software programs. And then our newest conference, our Reliable Asset World. So keep those in mind, and we do have a few level 1s left throughout this year, and we've got a lot of level 1s already scheduled for 2014. So be looking at those as we get towards the end of the year here. And with that, we'll send you all off. Have a great afternoon, great Thanksgiving, and you know how to get in touch with us if you guys have specific questions after today.